happy almost solstice.
Yes.
It's tomorrow and Friday, the darkest day in the Northern Hemisphere. I did spend one solstice in the Southern Hemisphere. It was really cool. I was like, oh, I could do this every year.
Right.
I could just jump like a tennis match over the equator and just hit every summer solstice. And just do that because it was summer solstice in December. I was like, oh, this is so different having the holiday time at summer solstice in the Southern Hemisphere. And then I'm like, why? What's all the advertising with all the snow and winter for that time? Because that only applies for, it's like the whole North Pole thing. But why is that marketed as it's snowy and sleigh bells and all of that? None of that exists anymore. I think we need to completely redesign the holiday time. But anyway, that's not what I was going to talk about. Listen to me. I'm just going off on that. But I also wanted to share before we get into what I wanted to share with you. We had our first guest last week, Zach, and that episode will be coming out soon. It was so good to have a guest. I loved having him here. It was really fun. And if anyone listening is interested in being a guest and having a conversation with us, let us know. Send us a message. Send us an email.
Absolutely.
And or you can DM us on our Instagram.
Yeah,
long conversation.
Whatever messaging platform you prefer.
Or if you're on YouTube, you just put a shout out, in the comments that you'd like to be a guest. Or if you're on Spotify or any of that, send us a message. Because it was a lot of fun having a guest on there. And we're open to have our conversation with many different people. That's the whole point. So it's interesting. I was listening to this. I listened to a lot of podcasts. I was listening to this podcast for the last couple of days. It's a psychology based podcast. I don't even remember the name. I think it's a psychologist. I don't remember her name. It just came up in my suggestions and it was a really interesting topic. It was about how to stop ruminating over relationships that you've had. How to help the ego to stop looping. Well, I was with this person. When you're looping a past relationship, and this doesn't have to be a romantic sexual relationship. This could be a friendship. This could be a family relationship that feels like it's incomplete. And this went into the realm of, say you have a family member that has died, that is crossed. Like my sister died a long time ago. And if I felt like I had unfinished emotions, unfinished discord with her, then the ego will ruminate that wound. And this psychologist, she gave the solutions on this. And it was so interesting to hear how she talked about the relationship never ends with this person that you had a physical relationship with. Even if that person leaves your life, like in the case of my brother who left my life, or like your father who left my life, or my sister who left her body. In the case of that, where you feel like it's unresolved, you are still having that relationship within you with yourself. You just don't have that other person physically to mirror back to you how they perceive you, because that's what we're in relationship for. Because my mind correlated that. I'm going to give some background to this of my own thought processes in the world of relationships, physical relationships, because that's, from my experience, that is how we learn about ourselves in the most in-depth way, is through the physical interaction of the day-to-day mirroring. You can have it with somebody remotely through the phone, online, through apps, whatever, through Zoom, but you're not going to get that whole energetic feeling, that frequency exchange like you do when you are physically in person with each other. My mind goes to, I am autonomous. I've reached a place in my life where I am comfortable with being autonomous, sovereign, single. I like that. I like that place. And I know that my higher self wanted to get to that place within the self where we are, because we're a collective, as in the self is a collective. We wanted to get to the place where we were coming from codependency, which we did in other lifetimes, into now let's come into this sovereign, autonomous, total consciousness in the self. I'm not in full consciousness yet. I'm not there yet. I'm in the process of it. But now that I've come into this space where I am comfortable in being myself, and I am no longer having the longing, the need for a masculine partner in a committed relationship with me. I don't need that romantic sexual relationship. And side note on that, going through menopause and having a total reduction in my hormonal production totally helped. I will give the credit to a lot of that. I've moved into a midlife part of my life as Sonia where I just don't have that kind of hormonal pull anymore. That totally helped. However, I've also done this daily internal practice of observe the ego, observe the inner child, looking at any man that the inner child is slightly romantically attracted to, and say, maybe he could be the one, which is what I used to hear. I no longer hear that. And so with this background that I'm giving on this, it's like, now that I've come into this space where I can just look at a man that I know my inner child will be attracted to, and I can just let that be there and say, no, this is just a beautiful man in front of me. It doesn't matter, inner child, whether or not you're assessing him. You're sizing him up. He is who he is, and I'm appreciating his beauty in front of him. I also know from vast experience with my inner child in this life that my inner child will lose that romantic attraction to him as soon as my inner child learns something about him that is not going to align with the romantic ideologies of my inner child. My inner child has a very romantic idealization of what a relationship should look like. And so I know that as soon as I find out, oh, he eats meat, like these are the triggers for my inner child to go, oh, maybe he's not the one. He either eats animal, he has a different political view, he's not open-minded. Maybe he's even like homophobic. He's not interested in kids. He doesn't see animals as sentient. I mean, there's just this list knockoff, and my inner child would be like, oh, yeah, maybe. Or he got the jab. Or he does follow some allopathic medicine practices. And I'm like, and I just observe it. I just observe, and the inner child's so tiny. And I observe it. I observe the inner child, and it takes 3 months or less of seeing the image of that man, because it's usually online, or like seeing some man that I'm attracted to in physical presence out in the field when I'm doing the system job. And it's like, I can see that there's an attraction. I'm like, just observe it. Just observe it. Let him be human. Let his humanity come through. Don't be Disneyed to this person. And then it takes 3 months or less before you see the more well-rounded aspects of his humanity come through. And I have learned through that process to become more autonomous and more sovereign in just sit and observe everything. You're whole and complete just as you are. It's okay, inner child. You can feel that way. It'll change. You're going to change your attraction to him. Most romantic and sexual attractions are coming from the mind. Most of them are mental. And so that has brought me down to this space of the man that I would really actually be interested in forming a committed partnership with is a man that I'm attracted to his soul, the totality of him, all the good, all the bad, all the dark and all the light, all of it. And that for me, I've learned takes time. It takes way longer than even a year. It takes time to see his algorithm of ups and downs. So then I realize, okay, in order to learn about myself, I actually don't need to have that kind of committed partnership relationship. Did I learn that when I was married? I did. I learned so much about my shadow when I was married. Did I learn that in the few relationships that I had after that? I did. I learned it a lot. But then I listened to this podcast, bringing us to that now. I listened to this podcast and she's talking about how when we are in a relationship, there's two perspectives in the relationship that has to do with you. There's the relationship perception of yourself interacting with another, and there's what's mirrored back to you about how that partner perceives you. And how when you have a relationship with them, and if they are removed from your life physically, your relationship with them doesn't end. What actually happens is that you don't have their direct mirror reflection back at you in the physical, but you are still in your mind going through the relationship that you have with them. You just don't get their perception back of you mirrored back at you. Well, then that brought me into this space of, oh, how interesting. Okay, so my sister left her body died, and that was a long time ago. That was in early January 2007. But I didn't have unresolved issues with her. I had the gift of being able to go through the death process with her. It was such a gift. So I got to have closure. She, verbalized all these regrets to me and sent me all these emails. And I'm so sorry for everything I ever did wrong to you in our childhood. And I'm like, with each regret, it was like, it's okay, Julie. We're just being kids. It's okay. Forgive yourself. I never held that against you. Oh my gosh, Julie, that's so silly. Really? Like you're regretting that? But you were only 8. Like, what did you know? You didn't know any better. Just the ridiculous little Virgo traits. Oh, and I should never have thrown the cat at you, and her claw dug in your forearm and you were bleeding and I felt so responsible. I'm like, oh my God, you've been holding that against yourself for 40 years? Really? Not that long. She only lived to be 41, but I'm like, so I got all that closure with her. But with my brother, I didn't. And with your father, I did somewhat. And so what this psychologist is saying is, you do not, and we know this from psychology, this is classic psychology anyway. Jung talked about this. I'm sure Freud did too. But I'm not a fan of Freud. So I more was interested in the work of Carl Jung. You don't need that person in front of you physically in order to have that closure, because that's the work that goes on within yourself. You can do all of that mirrored work within yourself with that person, and you can heal it and you can close it. Basically, you can heal the karma is what you can do. And that was like, okay, then that brought me to, well, when Julie left her body and her body died, I had 5 people who were archetypes of her pop up. And actually 2 of them had her birthday. And I told them, I said, you're an archetype of my sister. Your birthday's June 9th. So was hers. And they were like, oh, wow. That's amazing that you have awareness on that. Yep. I said, I think it's really important. It's key for your own consciousness to be very aware of who are the archetypes for the people that you can no longer interact with physically in your life, because universe loves us and provides that for us. The continued ability, the continued moments to interact with that mirror of yourself that you still need to see in order to see yourself in those ways. And the same thing with my brother, a lot of archetypes. And I actually, right before we were recording this, I actually messaged my twin Sonia, who is she's an archetype of my siblings. And I thanked her for being that, because I just then finished, finally, after a couple of days, finished that podcast episode. And I thanked her for being that in my life and really appreciate her for that, because she's really helped me to see those parts of myself that are more direct through my siblings' eyes, because our siblings are some of the most direct mirrors of us. What are your thoughts on this? I'm sure there's a lot.
Yeah. There is one thing that I learned that took this perspective that I had gained from listening to psychologists throughout high school into my early 20s, and from conversations with you. And we had been discussing mirroring, and we had been discussing all of these sorts of ideas. And so I was very conscious of it by this point. But the one thing that really put me in the driver's seat, so to speak, was when literally just recently I heard it phrased this way: anything that you feel in a relationship that is unresolved or ended poorly or didn't quite go in a way that was satisfying to your ego, you will subconsciously internalize that, and your subconscious will hold on to it even though your conscious mind thinks it has not held on to it. And what you will do is you will actually go out and search for relationships that mirror that relationship so you can try to solve it in a different way. And that was the summary that I needed to really take full responsibility of those relationships for myself. And really, there is nothing that you can do in this life except for heal those aspects of yourself, because you have no control over another person's perception of you. You have no control over the way that their perception mirrors back to you. People will come and go, they'll die, they'll leave you, they'll move on, they'll change. There's nothing that you can do to change that. And so acceptance of that is, I think, step one. And step two is then taking full responsibility for the fact that you are constantly projecting your vision of that relationship outwards, even if that person is no longer materially there in front of you. And so because of that, the awareness then extends from simply being aware of, okay, this is an archetype of this person, to what was it that I felt was dissatisfying about that relationship, and what is it that I want to change in this version of it? How can I change it? And you touched on that with the things that pop out. Oh, eats meat. Oh, believes in allopathic medicine. These are all the things that I wish I could change, right? But you can't. And so it's becoming aware of the totality of somebody, and how can I become more comfortable healing my uncomfortability rather than trying to change somebody else to fit my vision of what a comfortable relationship would be. And this is why I realized this without being able to talk about it so eloquently, because I would get into relationships, friendships more so often than not, where I would have lots of differences between myself and the people that I was friends with. And, there would be that spark, that connection at first, but that connection would turn into disagreements. Mm-hmm. And I'm not really somebody who fights with others. And that is partly what my karmatic vision for those relationships would then evolve into, is maybe I can shift this to be not have friction in it, and maybe we can see eye to eye without having to be so forceful with my own opinion, or without having to necessarily get into arguments with these people. And what I then realized was that, no, I'm actually seeking relationships where I have differences in opinion with people, so that I can try to change them, so that I can try to change their opinion with my own. And I realized that this would not work, because of how upset I would get every single time a difference of opinion came into light, where I would feel so triggered, and I just wouldn't be able to. It didn't feel like it was something that I was comfortable facing. And so when I really noticed that, then I started to focus more on relaxing whenever those differences in opinion came into light. Whenever somebody had a difference in view, I would focus on, instead of getting tense and trying to put my own opinion out there, because that was coming from the inner child wanting to change their opinion, so make them see something different. Instead, I would just relax and let them say what it is that they wanted to say. In fact, I would even go so far as to try to see it from their perspective. And I found that I could, most of the times, actually, I could see it from their perspective. In fact, there's not really been a single instance that I've been in where I haven't been able to see it from the other person's perspective. And this makes it very hard to argue, but I think that's exactly what I wanted to transcend. At the end of the day, that's what I needed to transcend, was the need to argue. And so now it's this place of, as far as friendships go, it feels like my consciousness has reached that heightened level. Everyone that comes in, I immediately see what it is that they're mirroring to me in my life. And if I don't, if they present themselves, then I simply wait. And I don't necessarily act on sparks anymore, which is something that I used to do when I was in my early 20s, especially. It was when I was really starting to confront this from age 19, really, to probably about 24. And then 24 was kind of a big shift. And I started to really come into where I am now, which is being centered and grounded about my relationships. And I don't actively seek certain relationships either. Rather, I have desires and intention for, oh, hey, I want more friends in my life that like are into this thing, right? Which I feel is a sort of relationship that's generally pretty free of karma. The only thing that you have to then be aware of is like, okay, well then what are the differences? And if you're always looking at what the differences are, I think that the differences are really where the beauty of the relationship is. I think that two very different people can have the most beautiful relationships. And so that's what I look for.
Yeah, that's really good. There's a lot of points in there. There's two that stick out for me to touch on. Not arguing in relationships. I learned through the marriage to your father that arguing is a waste of energy. It's absolutely exhausting. I'm not a debater. I'm not an arguer. I actually never was one. And I watched my father argue and debate about the rightness or the wrongness of this topic or this person or that person, an intellectual superior battle over who's had the most schooling, who knows the most. Let's consult with Webster. Let's see, Nana with the dictionary, the crossword puzzles. They're very much that way. Nana and Papa are, and bless them for it. They mirrored to myself and to all three of you who they helped to raise you, how to let go of that. I'm right. I'm technically on it. According to the collegiate, head office of planet Earth.
Right.
According to Britannica.com, this is the truth, said the Almighty God, Lord Jesus Christ himself. And, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. It's like I literally just watched all of that. So Mars and Capricorn of Papa, watched all of that. And I was just like, I remember a couple of times, I'm the youngest, I'm the smallest, two in my family, and sitting at the supper table and just like observing this going on. I'm sitting in the middle of the table and I'm just watching this back and forth. And it's just like, how is that pertinent? How is that important? Where is that getting you? Why would you say that? Why would you respond to that? And it just felt energetically depleting to me for everybody to have to state their case. And let's find out who's right. Nana was a big thing of, let's find out who's right. And she'd go to the Webster's Dictionary. Aha! Young Sherlock, I'm right. Your father's right. Michael's right. And Julie and I are just sitting there going, who cares? Is that fun? I don't think this is very the Geminis in the family. I don't think that's a lot of fun. And it isn't fun. It isn't fun at all to be who's right, who's wrong. And it's like in relationships, what we really want in a relationship is we want to be heard for our perspective because our perspective is valid. So I learned from that arena, that stage of my life, fifth house, seventh house stages of my life in astrology, that I would really like to come into the space of more the 11th house of humanity and go, everybody's different. Let's honor that. And here's my little Mercury retrograde in Cancer sitting in the 11th house going, everybody have their say and let's have a discussion about it. Let's be different. And I'm going to nurture you all and all of your different perspectives. I've always liked to hear different perspectives on different things. And yes, just like you talked about, the inner child goes, yeah, but I don't agree with them. And then it's like, who cares if you don't agree with them or not? We're learning here. Learning's fun.
I like surrounding myself with people who live very different lifestyles from me.
Of course you do.
And yes.
I also
obviously.
raised you to like that too.
Sure, 100%.
Because that's how we learn it.
But I would say it's, because growing up and being sort of like is growing up in a very alternative sort of household.
Oh, we were the weird family.
I never really felt interested in surrounding myself with only people who lived that sort of lifestyle, because that feels, I don't like echo chambers. I don't like confirmation bias, and I don't like being in a room full of people who are only going to agree with me on what it is that I say. Even though there have been times in which I have been I've been so annoyed with disagreements that I've thought, well, I'd just be better if I was around people who were like supportive of me, which is what the ego says. It's like, well, I just want people to support me in my opinions. But no, that's very not satisfying for me. I can't handle that. It's because there's no growth in that. There's no progress. Progress can only be made from a personal perspective if you allow yourself to become tolerant and see things from everyone's eyes. And maybe this is part of the ego's journey in this life too, because it just, every experience I've had has sort of mirrored that back to me, where it's, I would much rather just learn to become tolerant of everyone. I don't see there being an answer to solving the problems that humanity faces through more intolerance. I don't think that we can weed out improper opinions. I don't think that we can solve disagreements and strife and conflict by culling our population to only have a certain perspective. I think that people can only learn to grow beyond their means by allowing themselves to be in the room with their opposites and simply be, and not feel compelled, to insert themselves over that opposite so that they may snuff it out. I think that is what has gotten us war and chaos and conflict and genocide and torture and rape and all of these horrible things, So I'm not very interested in that. I don't generally offer opinions about things that are conflictual, nor do I really have opinions on most things that are conflictual. I don't really have a lot of opinions on most big issues that pop up. I didn't really have an opinion on COVID when that happened. I have not really had much of an opinion on all that stuff. And that's not to say that I've never what I mean when I say that is I see everyone's perspective and I see how they all compete and conflict with each other. And I see that those opinions fight for rightness. And I see that everybody talks so loudly that it drowns out information. And then they try to prove themselves through authority, saying, no, I have this authority, or I have that authority, or experience. I have this experience. I have that experience. But experience is minute. It is tiny. The singular experience of one human being will never be enough to solve one problem, nor will the combined experience of even 10 people, because that's only 10 perspectives in a world of over almost 8 billion people. How are you ever going to get, plus all these microorganisms and all of these cells and atoms that make up the entire universe? You can never have enough perspective to be able to solve an issue through just perspective alone. Therefore, tolerance is the only way to solve issues.
Yeah, first of all, I'm going to use the word trained because it's the word that's coming through for me right now. I've trained my inner child to love difference in people. And it started at a very young age because despite the fact that my parents were in this whole who's right and who's wrong thing, they did love meeting people with different perspectives. And so there was a dichotomy with that, it's our way, but yet, no, okay, now we're going to have the Yamagiwas over for dinner and we're going to learn what life is like in Vietnam. Because they owned the building that we rented from them in Chicago. And then we sat around and ate authentic Vietnamese food. And then I watched them shift from here we are at our own family dinner table and this is right and this is wrong and this is right and this is wrong. And now let's go downstairs and have dinner with the Yamagiwas. And I watched both of them be, oh, that's so fascinating. Oh, that's so different from my world. Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, really? Tell me more about that. So I watched that and I saw that aspect of them was more open. And to me, that just felt better. I just felt good in that, oh, we're going to be open for people of other cultures and other opinions. Just like in Chicago, we lived down the block from the Orthodox Jewish, a huge apartment building. And I was playing with boys in the streets who had curls on the sides of their heads and they were wearing the hat and the little tassels and everything. And they were just kids who wore that outfit. I didn't even ask them about it. It was just like, he's different. And he and I didn't even care. We just liked playing with each other because we were both playing ball and we were playing hideout under the bushes. And he wanted to join us in playing hide and seek under the bushes. And we were like, sure. And he's a kid with curls. Doesn't matter. Okay. I always saw the soul. And that felt to me like that was just more inclusive. I felt like we were including everybody in this because we're all basically here to experience, to love, and to have a good time doing it. It doesn't matter what you look like. So the kid with the afro with the pig hanging out of his afro, I didn't care if he had an afro. He wanted to play ball with us. Great. Let's all play ball together. I don't care what his parents do. I don't care about any of that. He's a person. He's a human. And we just want to have a good time and we want to experience this together. I've always looked at the world that way. So when my inner child would come in and say, yeah, but this person's Republican and I'm not political at all. And it's like, all right, then my mind will go to that old saying, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's hear what he has to say through his Republican lens. And I find myself doing the same thing that you do. I'm like, well, let's take into account, I pull back and I start to see the wide shot. And my consciousness broadens just naturally. And it's like, he's seeing this. And then I'll start to analyze the greater picture of how he came to that conclusion, the possibilities. Maybe he grew up with Republican parents. Maybe this is all he's ever known. Maybe he hasn't talked with other people from a broader perspective of, I don't really care how this person votes, or I don't care what this person's diet is. It's interesting. I'm going to learn from this person. Oh, there's a little common thread here for us. It doesn't matter if he's eating baby back ribs over there at the restaurant. He said something that I'm like, oh, that's a take on that subject that I've never heard of. Let's talk with him more. I always look at that. I look at people, and I do look at people through the lens of being a healer. This person's coming at me with an opinion, and it's different than how I view the world, and it may grate against me. It may be discordant from my perspective of the world. Let's give them a chance. Why are they having that opinion about the world? How could I possibly maybe just offer a broader perspective to this person? Because I look at the world through, we are all one soul with different perspectives, because that's how universe is. The universe sees us all as one soul with different perspectives. All right, let me come into that frame of reference. We are all one soul with different eyes. And this is where yoga for me applies. So I'm like, all right, I'm interested in talking with this person. That's how I can do my work as a quantum healer as well. I've had all kinds of people come to me for sessions that have a perspective that I'm like, most of the time, people come to me with perspectives that I perceive as being very limiting. This is a really limited way of looking at the world. And then out of that limitation of perspective comes arguments. Yeah, but this is what I know. This is right and you're wrong. And so instead of that argument, sometimes I'll even offer a little laugh, like a little moment of humor. And, oh, I totally hear where you're coming from. I get your perspective on that. I usually like to broaden my perspective. I'll explain this to them to take us out of this argumentative place and come into this space of what you're saying is completely valid. I totally get that you would say that. This is how I view it, and this is why I view it this way. But I'm open to all different perspectives. And I have learned that particularly, and I will thank your father for this, out of that argumentative stage in that marriage of, you know what? I don't want to argue because I just love you. I really love you. And yes, you have pain. And yes, you're suffering. And yes, clearly you didn't get these needs met when you were growing up. And I'm not your parent, and I can't help you go back and get those needs. You have to do that work within you. But I see this within you, and I want you to know that I see this within you. And there's a broader perspective of this. Now, that person who has that limited perspective, who is relating with me, they may not be willing or open to see a broader perspective. They may have a lot of fear of doing that, and they may want to stay in their little microcosmic bubble and not relate with you.
I will say this too, though. One of the more challenging things for me, and maybe other people will relate to this as well, has been confronting that the reality that people, if you adopt this perspective that I hold, which may not be the right perspective for everybody, it's accepting that may not be the right perspective for everybody. It's accepting that some people, like, on this world are meant to be very narrowed in their focus and very assertive. And
there's a purpose for that.
Exactly.
There's a purpose for everything.
And so I feel as though I talk about how it would be wonderful if we saw a world in which people did not have those discords and strifes and arguments, but I also don't see that as being necessarily a possibility, because the multiplicity of perspective is necessary in order for universe to have balance. I don't see it possible for humanity to, maybe we could improve our practices somewhat. And I think we are to allow ourselves, I think we have over the course of history. I mean, we have evolved from being a species that would just kill each other the moment we had an argument to now just arguing if we have an argument. So there's definitely some evolution there, and there's still violence, but it's more structured in a way. There is structure being implemented. And so I have to acknowledge too that I don't expect everyone to follow the same path that I do when it comes to just letting everything be, because I learn in this life from being totally neutral and from surrounding myself with all sorts of things. I learn from being confronted by intolerant people and having to remain tolerant, or not tolerant necessarily of intolerance, but just loving of them, just seeing them for who they are. That's how I learn. But that's not to say that if you're somebody who is faced with intolerance or prejudice, maybe it's your role to stand up and fight against that. Like, that could be, it all depends on, I think, what comes naturally, and there's a difference in how it feels. If you go down the wrong path with this, you'll feel resistance. And it's not the sort of resistance that gives you growth. It's the sort of resistance that keeps you feeling stuck. I'll try to think of a better way to put it. When I would argue against people, I felt like there was an inner resistance that showed up in me to that. There is a feeling of like, this is the wrong way for me. For somebody else, perhaps they're oppressed tremendously, and the right feeling comes out when they can speak that out and when they can voice their resistance.
And that's the lesson.
And that may be, but it's all about that feeling. It's an inner feeling, and the compass is always correct. So it'll show you.
And that's the purpose for that in their life, is they're coming. This is a life for them to learn to step into themselves by speaking up and speaking out. Mm-hmm. That's how change is created, from oppression into autonomy and sovereignty, which is a lot of the time that we're in right now. Mm-hmm. The second piece from your first big sharing in this towards the beginning of the podcast is, I see this from a broader perspective. I see us as a collective consciousness evolving from the need to come from more ego of I'm right and you're wrong. And it's coming to the place of where it separates us. And then we have that whole profitable machine of war that comes out of it, it's branded, it's a branding, it's a whole franchise, into moving towards, because we're now in the beginning of the Aquarian age, and people are, and I've done this myself, people market and promote the Aquarian age as being the age of unity. But unity is one dimension. Unity is the one soul. And I don't feel or see us really moving into unity. I see the concept of we're moving into unity as just that, as a concept. And I don't see that that is going to serve humanity in learning about ourselves by going back to one dimension of unity. 5D isn't unity. Everybody keeps saying that 5D is unity. 5D is honoring the individual and still loving them unconditionally for their completely autonomous, sovereign perspective. And that's where I see that we're moving towards. I see that we are all learning to accept our difference, because we are getting more and more different as each wave of souls come in and incarnate. We are seeing transgender becoming more standardized and more seen as normal. We are seeing all of the queer, anyone expressing themselves as non-heterosexual, as becoming more standardized. We are seeing, like, our Mars, who is really a two-spirits. We are seeing more humans coming in and saying, I'm multidimensional, I'm aware of this, and this is my world, and you have to accept me. I want to walk around with red hair or mermaid-colored hair. This is how I'm expressing myself right now. Accept me, because this is what feels good to me. I don't want to live in a standard, conventional, boxy home. I want to live in a tiny home, or I want to live in a yurt, or I don't want to live behind a fence. This is normal for me. Accept this. We are literally saying, I'm coming out of the box, this Saturnian structured box. And that's what the Aquarian age is. I'm perceived as weird, and that is the new normal. Accept that. I don't see that as unifying. I see that as I need to be just who I am, and I'm accepting of it. And therefore, that's now being reflected back to me. And we are accepting everybody's diverse opinions and actions as long as it doesn't hurt the self and hurt another. That's where we're moving to. Will we see that fully in this lifetime in my body? Probably not, even if I get this body past 100. We probably won't, but I am making the ripples in the wave of consciousness with this so that when I come into the next life, I'll be able to experience those bigger ripples of that. I'm putting that out there not only to make the changes for my next life, but to make the changes for you. And if you have a child, for them, et cetera, et cetera. But that's where I see that we're moving towards in relationship, which is really what we're talking about here is relationship. The relationship with the self and how it's mirrored is I'm different and I now accept myself. And therefore, I see that mirror reflection of that acceptance.
Thank you so much to everyone who listened to this week's episode of the podcast. Feel free to check us out on Instagram at One Long Conversation to get some updates on our future episodes, our future content. You can also follow us on Patreon and become a member. We have a lot of interesting and awesome perks and cool ways to connect with us and our community that we're forming there. So go over to Patreon at One Long Conversation and you'll find us there. We also have these episodes going out on YouTube now. So if you go to YouTube, yet again, at One Long Conversation, you will find video versions of these episodes. So yeah, thank you so much. We'll see you next time.